This is a short commentary to a number of slides that were taken on a trip to Poland in 1988. A group of Holocaust survivors decided that they were as ready as they were ever going to be to face down their past and many of the memories that had tormented them. I had the honor of being asked to accompany them. We chose the spring of 1988 to return so that we could participate in the commemorations of the 45th anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. We then had the fortunate opportunities to return to the towns, cities, and villages of our past. Today, we'll concentrate on the village of Yvansk, or Yvansk, to which most of us here have such a strong link. That's me, Fern Waterman, at the beginning of our trip. And this is a photo of the part of the village square. This is part of the village as we've seen it, and part of the new section, which obliterated the old. Just very typical from Fiddler on the Roof scenes of Yvansk. It was all very, very familiar to me through pictures and collective memory, where dirt floors still existed. These are pretty natural Polish roosters and hens. Just as we see from Fiddler on the Roof, the streets were dirt roads and old animals and old homes, some of them kept very, very well. This is a new section. The Jewish section used to be there. This is also fairly new, but you can see the village is still pretty much in the old time of dirt roads and pretty rough terrain between the homes. And we're going to go a little bit further just to give you more photographs of the old kinds of roofs, very much depicted in all the old scenes that we've seen from the old shtetls. This is the newer section, very well built, but in the old way, and power lines that didn't exist back in the 20s. Just looking up an ordinary street in Yvansk. This building is a fire hall, but it is on the premises of where the old synagogue was, that they said mysteriously had a fire. We're going to the Veldt now with a villager that very happily volunteered to take us there. This is his children, and we're walking onwards towards the Veldt. As you can see, there's no sign of any gravestones or anything else. The fields are all plowed right up to the very edge of the field that was the Veldt. This is just one of the villagers' kids who seemed very happy to be with us. And there we are at the place that was the Veldt, but nothing left, nothing at all. This villager had maybe 2 teeth in his head and was plowing right up to the edge of the field that was not planted because it was so bumpy. Other than that, there's nothing to be seen except this one little stone that looked as if it were a bit marbly and might have been part of the graveyard. And now we're entering a new town called Klimentov, which my own grandmother came from and to which many of you had relatives. This is just our driver that stopped at the town square, the church. It's a much more sophisticated town than Yvansk, but nevertheless still has some unpaved areas that are still from the old day. This is just part of the village that looks a little bit neater and newer than Klimentov, and an old address of the Greenspan family that just doesn't exist anymore. The house itself is boarded up. We can see this is the old pharmacy, which still exists, the quality of the old buildings, and the kind of transportation in 1988 that still existed. We saw things being transported all the times, even on the main roads, by horses and wagons such as these, which my dad said is just part of his memory. This is a newer part of Klimentov. You can see how it's built up. And now this is quickly taking us on a forest road to a commemorative ceremony at the old concentration camp of Treblinka. You can see that the camp itself has been wiped out. It was destroyed in an uprising, and these are people that have come for the commemoration ceremony. These are school kids from Poland who, many of them wanted to come and learn, and many of them volunteered to take us around to try to find the rocks commemorating our village. This is the sort of consolidation of ashes and sculpture to show our remembrance of those who were slaughtered. All these rocks, there's one from Klementov. Every one of those rocks commemorates a village or a town, and you can see how many hundreds, if not thousands of them exist to commemorate each and every town that was affected by the Holocaust. Yvansk, there's the one representing our town, and that's me standing by it. Another concentration camp. You can see the partly Arbeitmacht frei. We're too familiar with these towers, but I just needed to take a picture of one for myself. The watchtowers that were so dreaded, and the gallows, which had a horrible thing happen, but a good one for us, in that the commandant of the camp was hanged there after liberation. These are all too familiar pictures of the crematoria, and one of the few that survived, and that they wanted to destroy all the evidence. A later bunker that was built. The early ones were brick, but as they got more and more prisoners, they just built them of wood, and people had no heat, nothing. That last slide was one of a destroyed crematorium. This too, and that as they were retreating, the Germans wanted to destroy the evidence, but it was pretty impossible. This is an end track leading to one of the crematoria, and evidence of the explosions when they tried to eliminate evidence. Again, the end. This was the end for so many people. This is a commemoration at the Krakow ghetto and what's left of it, which isn't very much. They also tried to destroy. And Unschlagplatz, we all know that dreaded name in Warsaw. This was a commemorative ceremony to honor and remember all of those who were taken away during those dreadful days. And this is the Polish army soldiers that carried wreaths in that spot. One of our own survivors that went with someone else that was very much demonstrating about the horrors of that time. Rabbi Dal Marmer's auntie and uncle, who I met by chance at the Unschlagplatz, and who came with us to Treblinka. This is the memorial at the Warsaw Ghetto. You can see there's nothing left of it but the memorial. And this was by one of the bunkers in the Warsaw Ghetto. Here we are at a commemoration in Warsaw by the Brzezinski family, who went to Germany and is pouring hundreds of thousands of dollars into restoring a lot of the Jewish sites, including the synagogue here in Warsaw, the only one that's left. It was a beautiful synagogue, and it makes one's heart break for all the other ones that were destroyed. It's usually deserted, but that particular Shabbat we had many, many visitors, and it just was a very joyous thing to have a vibrant Jewish ceremony with vibrant Jewish people back in Poland, to give us an example of what kind of life existed there. This is the Yiddish theater poster giving another commemorative performance, and it's quite amazing because the Yiddish is great and very few of the actors are Jewish. I don't think any of them are, as a matter of fact, and it's a mystery as to why they keep it alive. This is a Polish Jewish man who was a diplomat and was very disappointed after the cultural pogrom, and that he lost his job because they found out he was Jewish. This is part of a demonstration in which Marek Edelman, the last surviving Warsaw Ghetto leader, gave in the cemetery, the Jewish cemetery, and nobody could touch him because he was so famed and so still beloved by the people of Poland, and so he could speak out about his love of Poland. This is hard to believe. Main Square in Warsaw, still showing anti-Semitism and how the greedy Jews are so rich and uncaring. This was one of the artists that did that and insisted that we were still like that. A slide of plaques in churches, and you could see Mauthausen and Auschwitz, and these were Dachau. These were Poles, not Jews, who were also killed and tortured in the camps. That is the Russian Cultural Center in the middle of Warsaw that the Russians decided to build instead of the subway that the Poles had wanted. This is the Warsaw Cemetery, and now this is the cemetery in Lodz, which was a very, very wealthy one. This is one of the last days that I was in Poland. A horse is biting my sweater, and my co-therapist is trying to get me free of it. And there we are, free of the horse and ready to go on our way. This is near the entrance of the Warsaw Cemetery, the largest one in Poland. Much of it in terrible repair, and that young man there is the only person that's working on it, trying to track down families and restore the tombstones. But it's a massive job. It's very little money, and there's hundreds of thousands of graves that go back many centuries. These are just some of them. There's one that says Wall, W-A-H-L, and of course there's the Wall family, who are lawyers in Toronto. And these are just various shots of the Old Hebrew that still exists. A lot of the stones are there, but in terrible disrepair. This goes a little deeper into the cemetery, and the deeper you get, the more unkempt the area is. But as you can see, that a lot of the Hebrew is still very clear. The stones are in more and more disrepair as you go further down into the depths of the cemetery, and it leaves one feeling pretty woebegone because of the fact that they demonstrate that there was such a vibrant and active community to have so many people represented in that cemetery. I'm just going to let you contemplate as we go through these incredibly numerous and neglected stones. It's interesting that for Jews to go back to Poland, their shouts of joy happens when they actually see a grave that they recognize, whereas most people, when they go back to their homelands and their past, see the now living relatives that they still have, or the descendants of relatives that they left, and we're just happy to see some kind of link that somebody in fact existed there, that we heard about but never got to know. And these are just more of the stones. I wanted to actually take pictures of all of them. They were all so interesting, but we couldn't do it all. Here you see people walking in one of the main roads in the Warsaw Cemetery, and still trying to find relatives. This is the outside and the entrance of the Lodz Cemetery, Jewish cemetery. This is what we would call the charnel house, where the bodies were kept and watched over and washed and were ready for burial. It's incredible the amount of wealth that was in Lodz. It was a major textile center, and the families that owned them were quite well off. This is near the fence, or the wall of the Krakow ghetto. You can see some earthy colored pits, and I'll talk about them later. But this too is near the entrance. Again, the further down you go into the cemetery, the more neglected it is. And it was really a heartbreak for all of us to be there, to see what had become, symbolically become of this once very vibrant culture. This is part of a pit that was dug by the few hundred remaining Lodz ghetto survivors, and that was for their own burial. You can see this cemetery is the Celts one, in which there was a pogrom, and all the tombstones of that cemetery that are left, they didn't know what to do with. There weren't that many of them, so they just put them together as a memorial for all those who vanished from Celts. I just want to go back and comment on those rather large kind of discolored squares that you see by the wall of the Lodge Cemetery. There's a terrible story associated to that with a little bit of a happy ending, in that the few hundred remaining survivors of the Lodge Ghetto were, at the liquidation of the Lodge Ghetto, were called upon to dig those very large pits that are now kind of covered, and they were actually to be their own mass graves. And yet the Russians apparently came so quickly that the Germans just didn't have enough time to shoot them all, so they fled and left these pits still not filled in, and those few hundred remaining people alive. And so that was, I guess, a bit fortunate for the ones that in fact remained. Otherwise they would have had the same terribly grisly fates that everybody else did at the Lodge Ghetto. What they survived for is why I'm in business, and that means that, of course, everybody who survived had terrible memories and had a lot to get over, if they ever get over it. But I just did want to go back and tell you the story of those particular pits. Similarly, the story of the Celt Cemetery. I pointed out before that I think we all know that there was a terrible pogrom in Celts after the war, and with all the destruction of everything Jewish in Celts and the pogrom, those particular tombstones are what's left altogether of the Celt Cemetery. And again, that was a very vibrant community in Celts as well, a lot smaller than that in Warsaw and Lodz, but nevertheless there was one, and I don't think there's one Jew left to this day in Celts.